Hello and welcome to this post-processing video for the fog workshop at Atlas Studios on the 8th of August. If you came to that workshop, thank you very much. I had a fantastic time shooting and leading you all around and I think we got some great input from everybody, and the resulting image was just fantastic. I was looking on the back of people's cameras, and there was some absolutely brilliant results. So well done everybody that came. I think everybody managed to come away and grasp the techniques very easily. I think they were obviously pretty advanced shooters, to be honest, I think, on that course. So hopefully you had a good time anyway. So as promised, here's the post-processing video, and this is going to be completely unedited, so it will be long and you'll get to see me cock up and possibly struggle with some technical difficulties with Lightroom and Photoshop and things like that. But without further ado, let's get into it. So I think we're probably going to process one of the first set. So this is where we started. So this is our sort of natural light measurement. And we started off at f8 here, and I knew that, yeah, okay, we were going to have to underexpose that. The sky at the beginning was particularly uninspiring. Just clouds outside, and this is what we could see. So that's the natural light. And then we got into turning the key light on and the backlight by the looks of it. And, it's interesting, but, all of Tink's figure here was in darkness, and so we got to fixing that. My first attempt was, well, let's add the fill light, which we gelled orange to contrast with the natural colour, the daylight colour that we'd got through the window and from the flash. That wasn't really working. We tried a few things with the fill light, but it became obvious we were going to have to do something with the key light really to do that. So we re-angled the key light to light more down the dress and down Tink's legs. So and then we tried a bit of fog. It seemed to be working all right. We've got a blue gel on there, and as time went by, so we tried a few frames with that, and then I thought, well, let's try and shift the white balance. Where did we get up to when we did that? There we go. So we shifted the white balance to get blue daylight, which is something I quite like doing for these industrial locations. But it just looked a bit now homogeneous, right? It was all blue all over. So we decided to take the blue gel off the light to get it to match the windows. And immediately it kind of looked better, and I think everybody agreed that that there was a marked difference there. There's sometimes it's difficult to predict whether that is going to be better, and I think, as somebody said at the time, says now it's all going to be, we're going to lose that that gel because it's just effectively now the same color as the daylight. So we're not going to have that contrast. But one of the things I was concerned about right from the very beginning is that this was going to look a bit jarring with this big panel of windows, because it isn't quite in the centre where this sort of set of steps is either. So we were going to have to do something about that. And I think tying it together with the colour of the fog and everything below has helped with that sort of thing. Otherwise you get the camera club judges would say it's a picture of two halves, it's like two separate pictures. So we went with that, and then to make sure that Tink was actually lit in a aesthetically pleasing way, we weren't giving a blue skin which was going to sort of blend in to the blue light from behind. We ended up with a quarter cut of CTO in the top light. I think initially we did go for a full cut, and it was immediately obvious it was a little bit orange. So we ended up with just a quarter cut in there, and it's starting to look good, right? This was probably the point where we've now got light down the dress. We've got some nice fill light coming up from below. The fog was working reasonably well. We weren't really getting shadows from the steps. There just wasn't enough room really behind the steps. We couldn't back the light off far enough. We could have used a smaller light, but we needed the power. But that is something to bear in mind, if you want sharper shadows in general, not just through fog, is to put the light further away and use a smaller light to begin with. It's going to give you harder shadows in fog, just as it gives harder shadows on a subject. So increase the distance. That light was as far back as it would go, so that's what we got. So now it's just a question of, we've got to go through and sort of pick a pose and a layout of fog that looks reasonable. So I quite like this one. It's quite nice, sort of symmetrical almost. There's fog in all bits. We can deal with all of this in Photoshop. Chop all of that out. We can straighten it and that kind of thing. Probably not like in this one so much. There's kind of like a big sort of pile of just pretty much grey. It's all homogeneous sort of tones and colours. There's not a lot of definition in that. We could try and put a local adjustment on there and just see what if we add some clarity, which is mid-tone contrast. It might bump it up a little bit. We can add some, boost the whites, just to try and bring out some definition in it. So if we boost the clarity all the way up, which has darkened some things, and then we add some mid-tone, which is called exposure in Lightroom. Just spread this out just a little bit. In fact, what we'll do is just put the overlay on, and then down here we can sort of trim in the feather, so make it, and then make it smaller, because I don't want to do this to the surrounding bits of fog which don't have a problem. So now we can get the fall off of that. So it'll be quite abrupt, because it does end sort of quite abruptly there. I'll just make that a bit bigger. So we could do something with that. We can now start to see some sort of definition in it, and we'll try some more adjustments, but I've got a feeling that we've got plenty of frames, in fact, the shadows are having quite a nice effect. We could dial down some of those other adjustments there, maybe. Bring down that clarity now a little bit. That's not bad, actually. We could try, as another way of constraining it, you've now got these colour and luminosity masks in Lightroom. So we can just draw a little box around there, which will constrain it to only affecting things of the colours within that box. And you can see that has now sort of defined an edge to it. And then, of course, you can also then just manually erase bits that you don't really want it to affect. So we might just take it off there. And there we go. So we could do that. And we'll bear that in mind. But I think we've got quite a few frames here that are going to give us what we want. Now then, so let's carry on looking. Now we can use a survey view to do this, but I'll show you quickly what survey view is, and I do use it sometimes, but I'm kind of like a magpie when I'm doing these creative shots. I just see one and then I just end up processing that one. But if we see a bunch of them that are roughly the same, so we select, how many are left over there? There's quite a few there, aren't there? So if we select that lot, if you press N, and I'll just go over here, you see all the shots laid out with no adornments. And the idea is that you zap the ones that you don't like, right? Until you're left with de facto with the ones you do like. So first of all, I'd probably go through these and just zap any that are sort of technically deficient. Now these are all test shots, obviously. There's no fog in these. It does need that fog, I think, to make this work. So I'm going to just zap those. There's a little cross appears down the bottom, and Lightroom sort of rewards you when you click that because it makes them bigger. So if we remove the ones, that one could be viable as that one. That one's got no fog in it. It makes the images bigger, as there's less of them to fit on the screen. You can get rid of these panels when you're doing this to make a bit more room on your display, but I'm going to keep it. And then I'm going to look through and see, are there any... where she's looking that way, we've got a bit of problem with the light. If you want to have a closer look while you're in survey view, notice that they're all still selected, but the ones that we zapped are no longer selected. You can see the light's kind of okay, but it's not the best, right? Because the light is up here and she's angling her face away from that. So I'm going to bin that one off. Let's just have a look at one where she is looking more up. And that, to me, works better. We've also got some quite nice symmetrical sort of shadows coming out there, which is quite nice. So I might keep that one. Expression, good. I like these dramatic expressions that Tink does. But again, the light's not the best. On that one, I think I'm going to bin that one off. These kind of more bigger poses with the big arms, I really, really like. They tend to look more balanced, and she's looking up there. I quite like that one. As this one, that's nice, and we've got some great definition in the fog there, and that's even better. This is a fantastic pose where we got the wind in with the hair flying. I think that really works well. 20mm, quite close. This little thing here is a reflection of the fill panel. And you can see, in effect, that's all it does to that dress. It's because this is a shiny surface, it's just reflecting the environment. It's like shooting shiny products. That's effectively what you do, is build an environment to be reflected in the product, which is why people use those light tents. It's basically a blank white environment that they reflect in the shiny bits of the product. And we're getting the same effect off this latex. I can live with it, but it may annoy me over time, and we may just, we could remove that in Photoshop quite easily just by copying and pasting the colour only. Lightroom does churn away when you do this in Develop. But there we go. Let's just flip back to survey mode and see which ones we're going to go for. I think we'll do one of these. I'm liking the fog on that one. The pose is good. This is better. The pose is excellent on this one, but I'm not particularly a fan of the thinner bit of fog. I think it sort of works, but I'm going to pin that one off for that reason. Now, when you start to get down to the last few, don't feel that you need to sort of carry on zapping. At one point, you're just going to go, I'm having that one. And I'm looking through here, and I am liking that one. I like that one. The pose is a little bit jumbled on that because she's got her arm in front of there, so it's a little bit blocked. I do like these more open poses where you've just got this nice shape with the arms. That's pretty funky, actually, isn't it? Not convinced by this lot here. We've got a bit of that greyness going on as the fog's gone a bit high. Let's include a few more. So I can go to that one, just add a few. I just got rid of the earlier ones, that was handy. Just hold the control and the shift down. And it will select more in the opposite direction. Right. Let's just re-zap those ones. See what we've got here. That's quite funky, but the fog's a little bit central. I'm going to bin that one off. That I really like, but this is a bit nondescript. That's nice, that's nice. Love that pose, but I think that is going to be problematic, that one. Look, let's zap the ones with the crap fog, and then we'll know what we're dealing with. I actually quite like that fog, and that pose is good. I think these are all okay actually in terms. Well, saying that, if we look on this, we've got this bit here. I'm not too keen on. Now, if you're wondering why some of these images look wildly different to the others, it's because I have had some experimental prods at the sliders on some of them, just whatever happened to be in front of me at the time, just to see how various elements would react. Quite like the fog on this one, actually. We've got those nice shadows. Pose is a bit blocked, though, on that one. That's a better pose. We've got some reasonable fog. Did we go all the way to the end? Let's get those in as well. So that's not bad. A little bit of a glow here. We need to fill this gap. Apart from that, it's not looking too dramatic though in terms of the pose. That's a nice pose. Right, we've got to pick one. Okay, so what's going to give you... I'm just going to go through, I think. So to be honest, this is how I normally do them. I'm just going to go through in the library module, and I'm just using the right arrow key now just to cycle through these. That's pretty good. That's one I processed yesterday. That was the original, that was the finished article. And we're going to do similar things to that one, to the one we pick now. That's quite nice actually. Nice pose. So some of these have been prodded, some haven't, so which is why the exposures look different. So don't worry too much about that. It's really just the shape of stuff that I'm concentrating on here. That is quite nice. It's just a shame about the angle of the face, but we've got really good fog on that one. It's really voluminous. You know, you can see that it's spreading out behind the steps there, and this is the same fog, just evening out, I think. And then I think this is where we're adding the backlight, so a bit of messing around with that, and then we were into the next set of shots. That's a great pose, just a shame about the fog in that one. So let's go back to before we did that. I think I quite like these ones. $15mm, really close. too far back there. Right, so it's going to be one from this end, I think. That is nice, actually. I think let's do this one. Right, so I'm going to go into develop, and we're just going to make this ribbon smaller now. We don't need that. And we're going to look at the color. Okay, so in fact, I know, is that one better? We might just have a look at some of these. So let's X out this. Let's reset that. In fact, we can just get rid of all the history. There we go. So that's what it looks like at the beginning. We'll just clear the history away. So the first thing I normally do is choose the color profile. So it defaults to Adobe Color. So we can try Adobe Portrait, which will raise the shadows a little bit. But the one that I normally end up on is Camera Portrait. So this is the Nikon profile. It'll be different depending on your camera, what the Camera Portrait profile actually does. On the Nikon one, it tends to flatten out the contrast on the skin tones, skin colors, and generally sort of raises the exposure on the shadows a little bit. It's not so good at producing definition in solid colors, right? So if you're using gels, sometimes the Adobe Color and Adobe Portrait settings are going to be better. And I'm going to try the Adobe Portrait one, I think, on this. We are going to need to bring up the shadows because it is a little bit too blocked. And I think the exposure in general, we were struggling for power, so I'm going to bring that up just in general, just a touch. We might, let's leave the shadows on max. But then just re-anchor the black point. Now you sometimes have to push it quite hard with these portrait modes. It's very reluctant to push things. And similarly with the white. Now there should be some blown out whites in this because we were photographing a light, which is just in there. So I'm going to be quite aggressive with that and maybe turn that down, the highlights down, which is this section here. You can actually just grab the histogram if you want. You can adjust it just by moving the various sections of the histogram about. And it's important to do this in the raw image where you've got all the data. I do use a 16-bit TIFF to transport them into Photoshop, which retains most of the data. But I like to do most of the color work, heavy lifting, and the tonal work in Lightroom before we go into cleanup. Now, the other thing to have a little play with is the white balance, because this can have a dramatic effect on the image. So if we balance it on the daylight, which is getting to about there, you can see that now the daylight is no longer blue. In fact, we can probably push it a little bit more, and you can now see the sort of quarter cut of CTO producing that warm light on Tink. But it's kind of lost, I think, a lot of the drama, really. I think the blue is the way to go. I might just warm it up to 3.2 rather than 3000, and then just take the hue a little bit towards the green. And we can see what that's done. If you hold the / key down on the Lightroom, you can see the before. So that's where we started, and that's where we're up to right now. I think let's just check. What I might do is just put a targeted adjustment just on Tink there. Don't really need to raise the exposure, but I might just increase the colour temperature just on her face, and maybe a little bit of fall off down the dress there. And if you want to see, you can toggle those on and off. It does toggle on and off all of the radial adjustments at the same time, but it'll give you an idea of what your adjustment has done. So I quite like that. We might just increase, we're going to go for a full stop on top, and then take down the highlights a bit more. Sometimes if you like the way that this works on a certain part of the image or not on others, then you can play around globally to see what it affects where, and then do a targeted adjustment with one of these tools to do the same whilst not affecting the rest of the image. And one of the things we can play with is clarity, which has a useful effect on fog, but you really don't want it on people. Try it the other way as well. Sometimes that has an interesting and pleasing effect. We've now got this thing called texture, which is like clarity but without affecting the it's more localized adjustment, so it doesn't tend to affect the exposure as much. So sometimes, to get rid of the crunchiness, if I want the clarity, I'll turn the clarity up and turn the texture down by roughly the same amount. Well, having said that, minus 46 clarity looks a bit mad, doesn't it? If we want to see, we can copy the history step, so that history step to the before setting. So now when I toggle before and after, it's only going back to there, so I can see the effect of my clarity and texture adjustment. So you see, it doesn't actually move the sliders when you hold the before down, so this won't change. So only the image will change. So you have to remember really what it was you did. So we moved these two. So we reduce the texture and increase the clarity. And then you can decide, does it look better or worse? It's like going to the opticians. And you can also decide where you think it looks better or worse. So having done that, you can then get your brush, targeted brush, do the same. So I might just put a bit more clarity than negative texture on this. Just get rid of that exposure adjustment. And then I can just brush it on where I want it. So I'm going to avoid putting this on Tink. I might just paint it over and then erase it off, actually. We might put a bit on the wall as well. Just give a bit more definition to the brickwork. So there we go. Okay, so then we can put the overlay on. And the first thing we can try is to put on a colour mask. So Lightroom now has luminosity and colour masks, and we'll just select the fog there. We can see that's brought it in a little bit, and we can then reduce that down. We can try another little bit there. I think that's reasonable. Let's see whether that's better or worse. Sometimes you're going to get a marked edge to the adjustment. So yeah, I think we're not going to go that route, so let's turn that off. So we'll just manually erase it. So we'll put the mask back on and go down here to erase. And I'm not going to use the auto edge detect because I don't need to be that accurate, really. I just want to make sure that it's not anywhere on our model. So it's going to do funky things to a skin texture. Okay, now we might then look at that and think, well, do we need to change anything else about those areas that we've targeted? So we could bring the shadows up even more on those areas. I think that is pretty good. We could bring the whites up, maybe, but we've got a bit of a hot spot in the middle there. We might then adjust these even more just to see what that does. Now we've got our mask in place. It doesn't matter whether we move the sliders before or after we paint the with the brush. We can try putting the texture back. Don't want too much in terms of that. That looks quite nice to me. I might just try another one down the bottom here where we've got just some clarity, just to get a bit more texture into that bottom bit there, and maybe just creep it up. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Let's see, we can toggle on and off all of those brushes at once, like that, and see what we've done. And I think that's pretty cool. One other thing we might do is just to do a couple of targeted exposure increases, just right up to there. Rotate it to match, and just remove all the effects. I just raise the shadows, which doesn't do a lot. But we could just raise the exposure, maybe not. I think actually I'm going to leave that. Let's go back to there. So let's come back, now we've done that, to the fog. Let's go back to the global adjustment, and you can see that on here, I think we need to just take the highlights down just a bit more. It's looking a bit aggressive. And maybe take the shadows up a little bit just to lessen that contrast. There we go. Right, I think we're good to go on that. Now let's think about straightening. So I'm going to turn the lens corrections on for this. What was I using? The 14 to 24. So it's reasonably, it just has a little bit of barrel distortion. From the from shooting so close. It's not a distortion in the lens. It's just the nature of shooting so close. I could use that lens over the other side of the room and crop in, and it would be flat. So now if we don't like the vignetting, we can actually turn that off. And I think I am going to, maybe not all the way, but I'm going to reduce the vignetting correction because it's I quite like the natural vignette that the lens gives. And now we move on to the transform. So we can gamble, right? We can press this button and see what Lightroom does. That's not bad, if we crop it in. But it looks a little bit odd now, right? She's a massive head, tiny body. So I don't think that's going to be the way to go. So we'll back those off. If we do want completely straight images, I find that the guided uprights thing is the way to go. So just choose some verticals and horizontals which are reasonably separated. But I think it's going to give us a similar effect to the auto, to be honest. And then we can crop that in. And I'm not liking that. I think we're going to keep the natural angle and maybe just rotate it just to see what that looks like. So again, let's go back to there. We can just see, does it look better or worse? I think we're going to go with that straight one. We could, of course, just accentuate the tilt and go with that. It gives us more of a natural crop. Take the crop image off and have a look at the overall image area, and then we've got the ability to sort of bring back some more elements of that image. Not too bothered if it goes outside of the frame. We've got our friend, the sort of content aware crop. The top of this image is pretty naff, right? I don't want any of this, to be fair. So I'm probably going to go down there and do that. I could crop it in a little bit more now. We could go back down to the transform and just do that, and we've got a little bit of stuff there which we may be able to just X out. Let's just unclick that constrain to image, and then we'll just bin off that window completely. We could just remove that in Photoshop, of course, but the more of this rubbish that I get rid of, the better, I think. Okay. And we could, now it's taken off the constraint to crop. They seem to mean the same thing. Constrain image in the crop tool and constrain crop down in the transform panel. You turn one off, it takes the other one off. Anyway, I think that's okay. We may do something else to disguise this a little bit more. In fact, we could try that now. Maybe put a graduated adjustment on and just darken it. I think that works pretty well. That's going to get rid of or minimize the effect of that bit of junk up there. Okay, let's go into Photoshop and tidy this up. So we're going to do right click, edit in Photoshop. And while that loads, some tips for managing this. I always launch Photoshop from Lightroom. I never start Photoshop just from the desktop. I always use a fresh copy. Adobe cannot really write software that well, and so you do get, this does collapse if you use it for long enough. So one of the things that it has been doing for the last couple of versions is that the image window will just freeze. The app is still working perfectly, but it will not refresh the image window. So at that point, I save the image, go back into close Photoshop, go back into Lightroom, reopen it, and carry on. And all the layers and everything's still there. It's just annoying. And it does sometimes just get slower and slower and slower. So after every image, I close it. I then use a fresh copy, if you like. So I'm using a little Wacom tablet for this. I use it's a really old, cheap bamboo one. I think I bought it at John Lewis of all places. But I find the small ones work a lot better for me. I did try a bigger one, but you end up moving your entire arm rather than just moving your hand on the tablet. And I find I can be more accurate with this. So our first job then is to go around the edge and clean these things up. And so what I'm going to do for that is hold down, hello, I got that in the way. Let's move me over here. All right, and then I want the polygonal lasso tool. I don't use the round one because it tends to not select things particularly accurately at the edges, and I don't need to be careful about going outside. Now I've got various things bound to function keys in my Photoshop, so what I'm doing here is edit content aware. I'm doing a Shift F5 content aware fill, but I've bound my Shift F5 to F5 so I don't have to hold the Shift key down because I use this all the time. So you can do that. And I've done that in the Logitech keyboard driver rather than changing the settings in Photoshop. So I've just redefined half the keys to do various complicated things in Photoshop. And you can do that on an application by application basis, by the way. If you get one of these, a Logitech Craft keyboard, it's really good. Anyway, we're going to let that have a think and deselect, and you can see that's perfectly fine. And do the same with this, just go round that. Oh, that didn't work very well. Let's zoom out a little bit so we've got a bit more room to work with. You can just double tap to complete the selection. I just never seem to get round to doing it. Look around the image for other distracting things. So technically, you know, this isn't a missing bit of the image, but that little bit that's just a different shade, I'm just going to get rid of. And it's done that just fine. So now we can go a little bit closer and have a look for bits of photo equipment. Now, as luck would have it, as we've cropped this, the fog tube has disappeared off the left of the camera, so there's left of the shot. So there's not really anything to do over that side anymore. But luckily there's a few bits of junk here for us to demonstrate the technique. Now Photoshop it's going to learn from the areas around what you select to decide what goes in the area that you want replacing. So be mindful of that and try and include some bits of the environment. And there is more complicated dialog box for content aware fill, but I don't tend to use that. It's quite slow to start up and we're not having much success with this. Okay, so we're going to go back to this and we're going to have to zoom in and do a little bit more granular. Now we can use this, what they call the spot healing tool. And this is effectively doing content aware fill. It's got content aware on there. And it means that I can just select sections of this thing, and it's just a faster way of working with content aware fill. And you can see it really struggles because it says, no, I'm filling and replicating this. And so it starts to try and add back in the cable. But that's fine, because all we want really is a gap where we can then go back to using the selection. And we can be a bit more accurate now in selecting our thing that we want to remove. Okay, so it's randomly picked up on this bit here, but not particularly bothered about that. We can just tell it to just get rid of that thing it's just generated. There we go. It's not particularly good at perspective content aware fill. There is another tool called Perspective. It's old school Photoshop before content aware, but it is a bit fiddly. So I don't really recommend it. Right, so let's go back to the spot healing thing here and let's see what we can do with this. That's not bad actually. Yeah, it was pretty good. I think we might end up just cloning in that line just to get that definition of that line back. So we get a bit of this up here, maybe a bit of that down there, take a bit of that one, put it there we go. So we brought that line back. I think we need a bit of a repair there as well. Yeah, it doesn't quite line up, but never mind, it's in the corner of the shot. We're not going to really see that. Okay, so back to our spot healing. Let's carry on. Do this section here. Perfect, there we go. We'll just do a bit more there. And now we're kind of in the free and clear on that bit. So let's try Sometimes it is easier just to do the big bits with the spot healer as well. But that's pretty good, I like that. Let's go for this bit. It's struggling with that, isn't it? Undo. We may just use good old-fashioned clone tool here. Just remove that. Made a bit of a mess of that bit, didn't I? Let's make the brush smaller. There we go. And then we should be able to then use the spot healer to go over that. It's picked up. It's getting further away. There we go. Don't like that. We'll use the let's go for that, and then get the clone tool and clean up that last little bit there. There we go. Right, back to the spot healing. Didn't quite do that accurately enough. The shadow. That's pretty cool. We could probably go all the way along with this. Not bad. Okay, now when we get to these bits with these edges, it's going to be easier. We can try the regular healing brush, make it bigger, and to just give Photoshop a hint of what it needs to be doing, we need to line up that edge there and then drag out over the thing to be replaced. And so it hasn't smudged it. Now you see, if I try this and just try and say, oh, okay, I'm just going to select that. Oh, all right. It's making an idiot of me. I think there was enough edge in the vicinity, so it has actually figured it out. But it very often sort of drags in bits of that and tries to merge it together into one thing. But as soon as we're having a reasonable amount of success with that, we may try so there we go. It's a bit too much, so we're going to need to do that in two halves. It couldn't quite work that out. So just go in from the sides. I made a bit of a mess of that one, didn't I? This is at a point actually where you may find it easier with a mouse for this if you need to be absolutely rock steady. Then use your mouse. So that's what I'm doing now. Then when we've got something irregular like this, I can't really clone up and down Tink's knee. What I will do is put up a fence. So I use the quick select and just draw over the area that I'm going to affect, and it snaps to the edge quite nicely. And then I can use the clone tool. Now, for some reason, don't ask me why, but these tools here do not obey the selection. They will still drag in stuff from outside the collection, but the clone tool will not. And because this is fairly flat, I can just get away with just sampling from down here and just going right over the edge, 100% clone. And then if we hide the selection, we can see we've got a little bit more work to do there. Let's go right up to the edge. But you can see it hasn't gone over the knee. The selection is still there. I've just hidden it, so we bring that back. So wherever you've got an edge there, put up a fence and then do the cloning just on the edge bit, sometimes if you've got masses of stuff to clone out, all you need to do is to separate it, and then you can draw around it with the selection tool and do the content aware fill. But if you try and do the content aware fill up to the edge, it just won't work. It just tries to merge the things together and it ends up being a bit of a mess. So we'll have a look around for any other bits of wire that we need. There's a little bit there. So we'll do the same technique. We're going to put up a fence around there. Hopefully that's good. Sometimes gets confused where the tones are too similar. We're already at 100%. Make that brush smaller. Just take some off there. Let it do its thing, and there we go. That's good enough. So now we can use the clone tool again to get that separation. And I'm just going to pick up a bit of this line here and just put it down there, and also a bit of this here, just put that there. Now you can see that's cloned it up there, so I don't really want that. I'm going to have to make the brush smaller. Go right there. That's a bit hacky, isn't it? This looks a bit crap. That. Maybe go for that bit, just so it looks like a shadow rather than whatever that was. I think it was the shadow off this cable, but that's okay. What's left there now is a shadow of something else. There's a little bit more cable there as well. So we'll also hold the shift key down to add to a selection. We're going to put one on that side as well. Just increase it a little bit there. And then we use the clone tool. In fact, there's so little here that we can just get away with just cloning in. In fact, we can make that clone brush bigger now. Nobody really knows what was there, so there we go. Right, on this side, I think what we'll do is just take the selection. Oh, you need the selection brush. Take the selection away from the this side. Now, sometimes it's just going to mess it up, but that's okay. We just have to put that bit back in. There we go. It's getting close enough. So just extend that a little bit more. So now we can go back to our clone tool and erase this bit off there. And now we've got this free floating bit of cable which we can draw around. Press F5 and watch Photoshop make a bit of a mess of it, but that's okay. I think we'll just spot heal some of those little bits away, because it's amazing how good the brain is at detecting patterns. So when you've got where Photoshop's kind of replaced something with something which is a bit too obvious, it's repeating a pattern, and your eye zooms in on it. It's not good. Okay, I think I spy a little bit more cable there. It looks like a fairly easy one. Okay, F5. Another quick check around. Zoom out a bit. Now your image always looks different at different zoom levels, so do look at it at different zoom levels. Zoom out, zoom in. You may be working close in on something and it looks fine, but when you zoom out, you can see it shows up like a sore thumb. I don't think we've got any of those problems here. The next thing to do is I'll probably look around now in the liquify tool for any sort of lumps and bumps. She's normally on the figure. We don't really have any problems here, to be honest. I'm just going to do this just to demonstrate it. Tink has very good figure. She's wearing a tight latex dress, which tends to sort of press things together anyway, and even them out. But you do sometimes get the odd wrinkle in the latex, which we can push and pull, but I don't think we've really got that problem here. We can, just to demonstrate, we can kind of, push and pull little bumps about, and maybe even up the expression a little bit. There we go. That's very minor stuff. Another area that sometimes needs attention is around the knees. I can see that kind of looks a bit odd there. I know it's a heel, but I'm just going to push it in. And again, make sure you then zoom out and look, and I think, yeah, that's fine. When people are standing like this, obviously the knees all bunch up. So sometimes you can kind of just improve the image a little bit just by helping that out. And if you've got well-defined muscles, then you those start to show up. Which, depending on your shoot, maybe something that you want, maybe not. But in general, if you're going to use the liquify tool, this isn't a good image to demonstrate it on because there's nothing to do really. I'm using this top one, which is called the forward warp tool, and you need to make the brush about the same size as the thing you're going to affect. Also be mindful of not pushing about geometric shapes and things in the background. So if I wanted to make Tink's hair bigger, I don't want to pull her face either, but if I do that, you can see that it's going to pull that frame up there as well, and I don't really want that. So just try and do your adjustments in line with what is in the background and you'll be fine. So, even though I am pushing that frame about in the back, there's not really anything to suggest that I've done it. Here I've just got a bit of blue sky, so I've got a bit more latitude to move, and the hand is more of an irregular shape, so who's to say she didn't have her fingers in that sort of position. Again, just be careful of this pipe here, so I'm just pushing up rather than to the side. A bit of sky there. So if you want to check what you've done, you can do that, and I think that's a little bit more even on the hair. Hair's another dynamic element that you can't really control on a shoot like this, where you've got all kinds of things going on. Okay, but that's all I'm going to do for that. Well, the other thing to mention, I suppose, which again is not going to be particularly useful to this image, is that we can do the face aware stuff. It has detected her face. I could, for example, make the eyes bigger. And in fact, we'll do them just a little bit. And again, you can see what that's done. You can do all kinds of things. Some of the stuff just does not work. I've never seen an image where the smile thing works. It just ends up looking odd. Sometimes negative smile can have a pleasing effect. But I don't really recommend that one. Sometimes I mess around with the mouth height. That can work really, really effectively. And sometimes the jawline. But again, that isn't something I'm going to do on here. It's just there is no problem to correct, so don't try and correct problems that aren't there really. So now let's get on to the cleanup on the skin. Again, we don't have a lot of skin in this image, and Tink has really good skin, and actually tattoos just work to cover skin blemishes, so it's like she's permanently photoshopped. Naturally photoshopped, shall we say. So, but I'm going to have a look, and we're going to go right into 100% because this is a small image, and I'm just going to, more out of habit or by demonstration, I'm using the regular healing brush now, so I'm holding the Alt key down to sample, and then I'm just dabbing over these little skin blemishes where they're showing up in the light. So just keep going like that. There's a sort of line there. This is a very effective way of removing those. sample from somewhere where you know you've got enough room to make the stroke and move it and clone or heal everything in the way, and then use that bit to that didn't work. There's a little bump there which I think we can just lessen. Might not, yeah, that's fine. There we go. I don't want to remove the tattoos, they're part of her character, and they're actually a permanent part of her face, so I'm going to try and leave them in. They're not they're obviously desired. Tink spent money and went through some pain to have them done, so I'm not going to remove them. That's why I hide her. But I'm going to just clone out some of these lumps and bumps. It's quite a a harsh sort of light, right? It's not hard particularly. It's reasonably hard. You can see the edge definition of the shadow there, but it's harsh. And what I mean by harsh is that it's raking across the skin texture and showing up every little lump and bump. So we can just help that out a little bit, and help out the tattoo artist as well there, just fill in that little gap there. And I'm actually just dragging the healing brush after the sample here to heal whole lines of stuff. So we'll check around the arms. There's a little gap there in the sleeve. That is a pattern, actually. It's not a gap. Also on the outfit, have a look around for unwanted little bits of damage and dust. What that bit was there, I think that is a piece of damage. We'll see if we can clone that. Not got a lot to work with here, to be honest, in terms of source material. But of course, we're generating more source material as we go. That's not really worked, is it? Let's go from there. Yeah, okay, that's less than that. Carry on down onto the legs. I don't think there's a lot to do down here. As you get to retouching images from a set, by the time you've done the third and fourth one, you remember where all the blemishes are. And from memory, I don't think I found any really on here. Once I've done that initial cleanup, that targeted cleanup, I'm going to do some general blending of the tones. And for that, I'm going to set up a frequency separation construct. I'm not going to talk about the maths and how to do this. I did in a previous video, I think. But suffice to say, what you're doing is separating the texture from the tonal values like the colour and the shadows. And so at this point, what we're looking at is that anything that is blurred or not visible now on this Gaussian blur will be on the texture layer. So we want to make sure that our texture is no longer visible on here, and that will then be saved. And I think that looks about right. Well, actually, I'm going to go down to 6. So there we go. You'll learn the values for your camera after a while. For a full figure, I'm normally around 6, and for a face, I'm normally about 8.5. So now what we've got is the high frequency and the low frequency. So that's the texture. So if we take the texture off, obviously we've got the layer underneath. If we take that off, we can just see the, obviously we've got the background as well, but that's what's on the texture layer alone. And if you remove all of it, it shouldn't make a difference. It sometimes does make a slight difference, but it's not really noticeable. But this is not a technique for fixing skin in itself. I often hear people say, I used frequency separation to fix the skin. Well, that's not really true. You set up a frequency separation construct to assist with what you're going to do, but you still need to use the usual tools like the cloning and the blending, the brushes and things, and the blurring to do the actual fixes. It just means that this is a safety barrier set up so that you don't destroy the texture, or at least that's how I use it. It's usable on anything that's got different frequencies of texture. So we want to operate almost exclusively. I operate on the low frequency. I hardly ever touch the high frequency. And for this, I'm going to start selecting pieces of skin, and what I'm going to do is just meld the tones together. Now again, I've got this bound to a button on my tablet, Gaussian blur, because I use it all the time, and I can see the preview there, and I might go for 8. So I normally go in for around the same value that I used for the initial blur, so I've gone for 6 there, and I've got the other button on my tablet to repeat. And if we want to look at what that's done, we can see that it's just evened out the highlight a little bit. In fact, let's select the whole of the rest of the lower face, and then we'll deselect the features. Now you don't really need to do this, but I don't want it really taking, because we're going to mask it off some of the details, but I don't want it taking that value into the blur, so we can just exclude it and then repeat what went on. And we might try another one, but I always end, when we're dealing with smaller features like that, I find that's too much. So we're just going to leave it at that. I do this arm. And you don't need to be too accurate with your selection. I'm just drawing this freehand because it's just quicker. And I think we might... we might go for... let's see, did I take that off or not? Yes, I did. Okay. So we might go for... a wider value on this. No, actually I think we'll stick with 6. Let's do that. Might do repeat again, it's too much. Just once is enough. Let's just see what it does to the black area. Well, that's quite nice actually, it's evened it out a little bit. So let's include those areas. I might just do this. And it works best, this, if I hold the Alt key down, I can just remove that. It works best on the more sort of mid-tone areas. And if you want to add to the selection, by the way, you just hold the Shift and draw more bits in. And we'll just do that. Now, don't worry about what it's done to the creases. We're going to take it off that in a second. Do the same there on our breasts, and then we're going to come down to the legs. Now the legs are in fog, so I don't think we're going to have to do too much to this, but it is where I might use a stronger, more broad blur. Do a couple on there, maybe do the top of the thigh a little bit more. There we go. Right, now obviously it's made a mess of everything around the edge, so we're going to clone that. Well, we're going to mask those off. So we're going to put a white mask on the whole frequency separation layer. Go to the brush, make it a bit big, 100%. I need it soft edged, so I'm going to hold Shift, just reduce that, and it needs to be black. And I think we'll start, well, actually as we're here, we'll start at the bottom. Hold the space bar to maneuver your picture about. And in fact, I'm probably going to just delete it off all of this area here because, of course, it's done strange things to the fog as well, which I don't really want. But up here, we're just going to take it off the edge. You can see that it's tried to sort of even out the bright fog and the darker legs. Also on the tattoos, of course, it ruins the definition of tattoos, so if you want to keep those, and any shadow edge I'll draw around generally. But that's it, there's not a lot to do there. Again, down here, we'll take it off the edge of the arms. And off that, just to make sure it's off there, off the top of that tattoo there, and just off the edges of the costume. More edges around there. Hair, of course, we don't want it on. And we don't want it melding the edge of that. any detail on there. And of course around the face, we don't want it on the hair, around there, or on the eyebrows. We're going to go just around that little crescent there. Eyes, we don't want it on the eyes, on this little tattoos, or the mouth. So even though we deselected this, I am just going to just mask it off that as well. If we want to check what we've done, we can zoom in and just toggle that on and off. So that's off, that's on, it's off, it's on. And then any sort of problem areas that we see where we don't really want it, so on the, we're losing the edge of the nose there, we can take it off. It's off, on, but and then look at it from zoomed out as well and see if it looks. So are you making the image better or worse? That's something really which you need to consider. I think there's a little bit of an area here where we might do a little bit more work, and more by demonstration than out of necessity again. I'm going to make a copy of the low frequency layer for this because I sometimes mess this up and it's easier just to destroy the layer rather than trying to find out where you got to in the history. And I'm going to use the rotate tool. I'm going to hold the R key down because I'm going to need to make brush strokes, and I'm going to use the mixer brush. And on this I've got no paint on the mixer brush. And I've got all the settings at 30 apart from the flow, which is 10. So I've got the no paint at all option, so it's just going to merge the colours that are already there. And of course it's not going to touch the texture because I'm just doing this on the low frequency layer, and I'm just going to tidy up that line there and just even that out. So I'm just following the natural contours, but sort of straightening them and evening them just by using this mixer brush as a highlight there. And then when I finish, I'm going to press escape to turn it the right way around, and then we can look at just what that layer is doing, and I think you can see that it's kind of like improved the sort of definition on there. This is very useful normally on the legs. If people have got knobbly knees, Tink hasn't got knobbly knees, but if they have, you can use this to sort of blend it in and sort of draw that. And if you've got a highlight on the legs actually, or on skin, especially if you've used oil on the skin and you get those specular highlights, you can drag them out and make them smoother, which can make the whole figure look more lithe and sylph-like. So that's a very interesting technique. I might just use it on the on a face here, just to sort of merge these shadows a little bit. So we can just merge all those colours together and then check what you've done. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Right, so the other technique we can use, the last technique that I'll demonstrate for this, is by using a brush. So I've made a new layer above those two low frequency layers, and I'm going to use 10% flow, 10% opacity. So just press 1 and shift 1 to set those values. You all move these on there. And what I'm going to do is sample the skin here, and then go up diagonally 45 degrees a little bit, and then I'm just going to brush over it multiple times and build that up just to get rid of that little bit there. Can you see that? So we're just building up and removing that shadow a little bit. I'm going to do it on this side as well. And of course this is an absolute change as I build it up, but it's not affecting the texture again because I'm only doing it on the low frequency, so I'm not getting, even if I build it up to 100%, it still won't be a solid block of colour because the texture is on a different layer. And I can just use this now as a sort of a dodge tool in effect, just to go over these darker areas. And then again, we can check what we've done. I possibly don't like it on that bit that I've just done. If you do see a bit like that, just put a white mask on. Again with your brush, go back to 100%, black mask, and just say, right, I'm not going to have it on that bit. because that's actually altering the structure of a face, and I think that's not really quite what we want. But the rest of it we do, and so now we can zoom out and again check that. And you can see this makes minimal difference, right? I want to emphasize that you don't have to do any of these things. I'm doing most of them just to demonstrate the techniques. You could get away with just processing some of these shots in Lightroom. In fact, I've been through some of the later shots, the wide ones we did in the big room, and you know, you look at it and you think it's pretty much done. I mean, there's just by adjusting the tones, all I've really got to do is just remove the fog machine from those. But if you need to, then that's a technique you can use. You can make as many copies of this as you like, and then normally when I'm happy with one, I'll merge it down by pressing Control E, and then if I'll do another copy then, so I'll press Control J, make a fresh copy, and then do my next thing. Anyway, I think we're done with that, so we can check the whole frequency separation layer. You can see it's almost unnoticeable really on this image. There's not a lot to do. So we're going to flatten the image. I don't keep the layers. Right, I know there's lots of Photoshop people going, no, you've got to work non-destructively. Well, it isn't designed to work that way, so you do end up with a billion layers, and it just slows the thing down to a crawl, and it means that I'd just be tempted to come back and mess with stuff, and I'd never get the image finished. So I don't. Once I'm happy with something, I commit it and just flatten everything down. If you want, there's loads of tutorials you can find. You can make folders and rename your layers and all that kind of stuff. I don't bother with that. I'm using Photoshop to, just as a means to clean stuff up. Right, so we're kind of, there's not a lot more to do to this. We could do some targeted color adjustments on the curves tool, which we might try in a minute. I think before that though, I'll do my sharpening regime, which is more about contrast boost. So I'm going to make a copy of the layer, and I'm going to desaturate it. So that's Control Shift and U, just to get the luminance values, and then I'm going to do a high pass on it. And I'm just looking at the layers, the edges. That's quite aggressive actually. We might even need to go down to 2. But no, I think 3 was the answer. So let's do that again. I should bind this to a button actually, because it does tend to lessen. So now in the preview it looks quite aggressive. I don't know if you can see that on the video, but we can see the edges picked out there, which is what I want. It's a bit like clarity this sometimes, but it is masked off those areas, but it will lessen when I do it for real. You can see it's a lot less. And now we're going to blend that grey layer as overlay, and again you can toggle on and off. At this distance I think we need as much punch as we can get, so I'm not even going to mask it off anything. I'm not going to reduce it. I'm just going to commit that. Now, something that I sometimes do that sometimes works, sometimes not, is another duplicated layer, and we're going to combine it with itself on a multiply blend mode, which you could do by making 2 layers, putting the top one as multiply and then merging those down. That's just how I've chosen to do it. Effectively what we're doing though is trying to pick out and isolate the highlights a little bit. So there's other ways you could do this. You could use the targeted selection tools to pick out the highlights. You could make a copy of the image and do crazy things with the contrast using levels and curves, and then use that as your basis. But that's what we want to do. But then we're going to recombine it on screen. And then what we can do is blur the image, blur that new layer. And this is effectively going to give us bloom on the highlights. I use this technique on the old Hollywood portraits to generate that sort of flare, and they used to get off those old lenses. It's quite effective, but obviously we don't want it that much. I normally end up at around the sort of 20 to 25 mark. And then we can toggle it on and off and see, is it better or worse? Now I think, yeah, it does add a little bit. Maybe not. Maybe we need to come down a little bit, say 20%. It's adding a little bit more fill in general, which we were struggling with on that, and I think that's pretty cool. Actually, maybe bring it down just another couple of points. 15%. There we go. I think we'll go with that. Commit. Oh no, I've done it now. So let's, again, nothing's jumping out at me on this, but I'll sometimes adjust the tone curves on each individual channel. So on blue, for example, if we put more blue into the highlights, that could give us some nice effects. Of course, we can take the blue out of the highlights. Now, some people will try and tell you that taking the blue out increases the yellow, but it doesn't. The yellow has to be there. You cannot add things by taking other things away. But what you're doing is making the yellow show up because you're lessening the blue. And I've got a piece on my blog that will demonstrate that. But I don't think that's the way to go in this image. Now, of course, the reason why we can do this in Photoshop, and I can't do this in Lightroom because I can't mask it off. There is a tone curve in Lightroom, but it's global. Right? That it's not available on any of the targeted adjustment tools yet. So I think that's got potential. You know, we can take the blue off the shadows and just have it. In fact, we'll just pin it so that it doesn't go anywhere, and then we can just put it on the highlights. It's got some potential, that, to be honest. I'm going to take it off for now, and we'll try some of the other channels. If you want to really do this properly, you should probably make 3 tone curve layers and do each one on a separate one, so they can have separate masks for your red adjustment, your blue adjustment, and so on. But just for a test, we want to see what increasing the luminosity of the various channels can do. Sometimes, of course, we want to take it off and increase it maybe in other areas. So we could get red down there in the shadows and just have that just down there. That might look quite funky, actually. In fact, we could just have a red boost in general down there. I'd probably want it more orange though, so we put a bit of green in as well. Not too much. Just on the shadows. The green is very sensitive. So now we've got a bit of red down there, but I don't want that over the whole image. So let's just make a black mask, get a big soft brush at 100%. Oh, paint in white, that helps. And just paint that in down there, maybe. Maybe paint a bit more than we need, and then we can get an even bigger brush, black brush, and just eat into it. And we can decide then whether that makes the image better or worse. I'm not convinced. We can try maybe just a more of a subtle. Yeah, actually I quite like that. Let's commit that one. Let's do another one and just see what we can do with our blue channel. I did quite like the blueness of the highlights on there, so I think we will take those up. But I don't really want it on the face. Let's see what happens if we take it out of the shadows. No, maybe not. Just delete that point. But having it on the highlights is quite nice, but I don't really want it on the face. So again, I want it everywhere else. I'm going to keep the white mask. I've got my black brush already, so I'm going to make it smaller. And I'm just going to paint that off on there. In fact, anywhere there's skin, really. Maybe on the dress as well. Now that gives us some colour contrast, which is quite popular with sort of boudoir
photographers, they'll very often do this. They'll colour the background bluer and then have the skin warmer, and it's quite a popular look. So there we can, and there you go. I think I'll keep that. I think that looks all right. Again, we're going to commit that now, I think. Now, the final thing that I'll do really is just a bit of sharpening, localized sharpening. So I'm just going to use the good old-fashioned sharpen tool. I'm just going to dab it on the eye. I think I've got it at 50%. Normally on the hair as well. Maybe on some of the edges and details on the tattoos. But that's about it. There's not a lot to do. On the mouth as well. So facial features are always a good thing to sharpen. I would normally do something with the hair on sharpen and raising the highlights, and I'd probably do that with a screen layer. One of the things we can do actually, this is a useful technique, is duplicate the image and blend it with screen, and then double click on the right hand side of the layer to bring up the layer style panel. And down here on the underlying layer, I'm going to remove that layer from the shadows basically. So what I'm going to do is just move that slider about until it's starting to sort of come off the skin. But obviously I don't want that abrupt change. So if I hold the Alt key down, I can split this slider in two. And then I'm just going to take that all the way to 0. I'm probably then just going to mess with it more. And this is, to be honest, just another way of adding contrast to your image, and I don't think it's really suitable in this. I'm looking around the image to see, are there any bits where it's making it better. I think possibly the only way that this is working is on the edges of the bricks there, which might benefit from a little bit of a boost. So we've gone for a gradual fall off across the tonal range, but obviously we don't want that everywhere. It's a bit of a mess. So again, white brush, soft white brush, and I think it kind of looked all right on there. No, that's the sharpening tool. Duh. Right, get the brush, white brush, 100% soft, make it quite big, and then I can paint up and down there just to see what that does. I think don't really want it on that bit. It's bright enough as it is. Make the brush bigger so that it's more gradual. Do that, and then again let's check, see whether we want that or not. Maybe not so much, so I'm knocking the opacity down 34%. Yeah, I've put it on that cloud as well, haven't I? So let's take that off. And there you go. I'm not convinced by that, to be honest. So I'm going to reduce it more, and then we'll leave it at that, I think. Right, have a final check around. Oh, actually, one thing we could do, which I like to do for sort of these statuesque, especially when they're sort of distorted sort of things, is to, I mean, we could do with losing a bit more off the top of the image, I think. So what we will do is, we're just going to zoom out a little bit. We'll go into the crop tool. Now, I think we're going to keep the ratio, which is 2 to 3. But I'm going to just take it down just to the corner of that, the wall there. In fact, let me turn the snap on and then it'll stay to the edges. So about there. I'm not going to use content aware fill though. Actually, yes, I will. We're going to do this in 2 stages. So we're going to do that. So that's going to crop the top off and add the equivalent amount to the bottom. So we'll wait while it does its thing. As long as you do this in small steps, it's reasonably successful. Sometimes I then clone bits of the fog at the bottom just to break it up a bit because it tends to create lines. So we'll do that now. Make that bigger. So we're on 100% soft clone brush, about that size, and I'm just going to take pieces from there and a piece from there. That's a bit too bright. Let's put it on 50%. And just to break up that, because it tends to introduce patterns. And there we go. That's enough. You don't need to do too much. Just to that's created a bright spot now there. Don't want bright spots around the edge of your image. So there we go. So that's taken a bit off the top and added a bit to the bottom. But I'm also now going to make the legs a little bit longer. Now, we may not get away with this. It kind of works better, A, when you can see the legs, and B, when the image is straight up and down. So we've tilted this one. But we're going to give it a go. In fact, before I do that, we are going to... we will make a copy. And we're going to go into Free Transform. And we're going to hold the Shift key down. And we're just going to stretch that down just by a little bit. Okay. But I don't want to do it... In fact, we'll be a bit more aggressive. I'll do a little bit more. There we go. But I don't want to do it over the whole... image. In fact, let's abandon that. I'm going to do just the bottom half. So we'll do a selection and do it up to about there. Do Free Transform, hold the Shift key, bring that down there, and press return. That's going to make her legs look longer. Like that, but we don't want it over the rest of the image because it starts to look stretched, so we can put the mask in there, and because I had the selection active, it's masked off the top, but that's okay. Nothing happened on the top anyway. And I get the brush, black brush, and now any other bits, like I don't really need it on the the join there. We don't really need it on that, or on the railings either. So I'm going to take it off the railings and off the bottom there. Of course, we've lost a bunch of image, so we're just going to bring that back. So we don't need it on there. And because we've got fog in the image, that kind of hides the join. Right, it's great for that. Just going to make sure that I've got those railings all done, because they're, if they're not straight, then that'll show up. And now we can see the net result is that she's got slightly longer legs. Now, luckily for us, that step is really hidden behind there. When we do the on and off, we can kind of see it. We might just try clone or masking that off, just with a very small brush. And pushing that up there. So now it is really just the legs and the surrounding fog which goes up and down. It is a technique that I use quite a lot on when I want to make the figure look statuesque. And if they're standing up and down straight and there's a fairly amorphous background, then you can just drag it down by like 5 or 10%, not too much. And then sometimes I'll do the reverse to push the feet back up, because if the feet start to look too long, that can be a bit odd. If you really want to get into this stuff, you could use Puppet Warp and all those kind of things, but I find that's just too much effort for the game that you're going to get. This is a nice, easy way of just drag it down slightly. It just helps anybody out. Not that Tink needs any help, really, in that regard. So there we go. I've used lots of techniques on there that I didn't really need to, just to demonstrate them. If you've got any questions about any of those things, then you can put them in the comments below, or email me, or contact me via your preferred social media device. But your mileage may vary. I don't look at all of them that often. But I think that's what I'm going to do to that. So I think we're done. I've flattened it. It says background. Make sure it says background and not layer 0. If it does, flatten the image again. And I'm just going to save that now. And my document's only 200 meg, which is good. If I'd have kept all the layers, it would have been gigabytes in size. That's our base image. I'm just going to quit Photoshop now. It's still saving. I've started using zip file compression. It takes a long time. So it is now saved, I believe. Is it going to quit? Yes, there we go. So back in Lightroom, the advantage of launching Photoshop from Lightroom is now the edited copy is in my library now with the same ratings and metadata as the original. So if we select those both and press compare, let's get rid of all that noise on there and I'll go over here. And now we can see what we've done in Photoshop. So that's where we started in Lightroom on the right. And this is after our tuning in Photoshop. So the most visible changes are the things we did last, really, which are we put a bit of red down here, or we bent the colours that were already there to a bit more towards the reddy orange. There was a bit there already, look. We put a lot of blue into the highlights. We changed the shape of the hair a little bit. And that's about it. And then the cleanup, right? We can see these barely noticeable wires. We spent some time cleaning those up. The rest of the tweaks, not that impactful. Just did them. You know, we really didn't need to do anything to the skin. That would have been fine anyway. You can see that it looks hardly any different. But that's about it. So hopefully that was useful. Now I did mention that we sometimes do some double processing. So at this point would be when I would do some of the more wacky sort of adjustments just to try them out, and then I might do different versions. Now, you know, so we can see what does it look like in black and white. Not bad actually. Quite like that in black and white. Now it sounds odd, but sometimes I shoot, well, a lot of the times if I can, I will shoot my black and white images with coloured gels because it means that I can adjust the zones in post after. So if I put that into black and white, we can now, with knowledge of where these colours are, you know, we can adjust them. You know, so we could get rid of the blue. You probably wouldn't use the targeted adjustment to do it because it's going to do it progressively with. Well, actually, I say that, but it's just moving the blue. But normally, it would move these others proportionally around it. But you know, so if I wanted a bit of a boost on the skin color there, normally skin is orange, but I think because maybe we warmed this a bit, it's gone for red. That is actually red. But you can see it's just pulling up the hair and the skin. It's not touching the dress because that's green. But that's what you would do if you wanted to do a black and white. I don't particularly want to do this one as black and white, but I might, looking at it, think about, you know, some more targeted adjustments for white balance. Just up on the face there, I might just get a graduated radial filter and just check my so I want the graduation to be as smooth as possible, like that, and then I can just warm that up just a bit, and I think is that better or worse? Let's have a look. Probably a bit too much, so let's bring it down even more. If you drag the number, by the way, in Lightroom, you get a much more fine-grained adjustment. So click and hold on the number and drag it left and right. So I think we'll maybe just go for 11, just to see where it drops. Maybe a little bit less. 10. Okay, there we go. One of the other things that we did touch on briefly in the workshop is the idea of profiles in Lightroom, and these are actually lookup tables or LUTs. and what lookup tables do is map areas of brightness to pixel values. So it's a map of, it's a lookup table of, when you see something which is this brightness, make it this color and brightness and so on, or this hue, adjust it in this way. So it's a fine-grained map, and you can make these in Photoshop. You can make them out of a stack of layers, and crunch those down into a lookup table, and then apply that effect either in Photoshop or export them and import them into Lightroom. It comes with some already, which I think are quite funky, and just by hovering your mouse over these, you can see what they're going to do to your image. And when you have lit it dramatically like this very often makes a very nice effect. And there's some black and white, pre-canned black and whites there as well. I'm not sure I'm going to use any of these things on this one. There's another set down here called Modern. You don't have to use them at 100%. You can back them off using this slider. But when I'm testing them, I'll normally just look at the effect at 100%. And then maybe dial in as much of it as I want. So you can see some there where they crush the blacks and they make them, and they bring the blacks up, things like that. Vintage ones, these are quite useful. Actually, if you are doing a sort of vintage colour shot, this is a nice, easy way to add that effect. And again, I would do it after the cleanup in Photoshop, because then I've got the actual base image retained. Right? I'm not going to bake these settings in Photoshop. I'll just do them in Lightroom, these wacky colour adjustments, because I can always go back to the original then if I decide that, what was I thinking? You get up the next day and you look at it and you go, ooh, why have I made all that washed out and pink? It was much better how it was. And I think in this case it generally is. So, but those are there. Look out for them. You could dial one in at the beginning, then go into Photoshop, do your thing, come back and put a different one on at different strengths. But again, it's all global. There's not a lot really you can do with it after you've done that in terms of constricting it. But there they are. But I'm not going to do anything with that. The last thing to do is to export it, which we'll do right now. And I didn't mean to select that, but I think, hey ho, we'll leave it. I'm going to export the original as well, so then we can do a quick compare. The image will look slightly different after we export it. I found that crushing it down into 8-bit JPEG does add a bit of contrast, so we need to be mindful of that. And if it does look a bit crunchy next to the preview in Lightroom, I might take some contrast off and then re-export. But the way that I do my exports, this is worth looking at actually, because I've been fighting with this for years, and recently Adobe have introduced the idea of bulk exports where you can tick more than one preset at once. First iteration it didn't really work, but now I think they have got it right. So I use these presets. Wallpaper is HD res. That's the resolution of my screen, my monitor. I don't have a fancy dancy 4K or 8K screen. I have a specific version for Purple Port, which is 900 pixels wide, which is the limit, so it avoids being resized. They're not going to resize it. I use a PNG for Facebook because for whatever reason, Facebook does not recompress PNGs on a Facebook page. All right? This makes no difference if you post it to your stream. It will just recompress it and make it into a JPEG. And similarly, if you then repost that into a group or something like that, it will recompress the images. But on your page, and I've proved this by uploading images side by side, JPEG and PNG, they look identical on my desktop. I upload them to Facebook. You look at the images on the Facebook page and the JPEG one has been mangled and re-downsized. It leaves the PNG alone. I don't know why, because the PNG weighs twice as much in terms of data for the equivalent sized JPEG. And Lightroom now does natively output PNGs. It didn't used to. I used to have to pass this through a plugin for ImageMagick to do that, but now it does them natively, so I can use them as part of this workflow. And I'm also going to do one called Website, which is slightly smaller than the wallpaper. It's 1024 deep, and this is to allow for crap top and bottom on web pages like Flickr, right? You never get the full screen. But I still don't want it to be resized. So I knock a bit off. So it's a nice sort of round number in binary, 1024. So it's 1024 pixels deep by whatever wide. So those are my 4 outputs that I'm going to do. So I'm going to do a batch export, and then we're going to choose our destination. I think I'm just going to start making things in here. So I'm going to put this fog workshop, if I could spell it, fog workshop 1. Okay. And then select that, and now that's up there. When I want to select it again, I can just choose it and then just press select. So I'm in it already, but for some reason it never retains this. And now we've got those 4 lots of output that are all going to be done at once. I can just click export and it'll get on with that. You can see the progress bar going on there. And the overall progress bar going on down there. So it's doing the next image. And eventually when it's finished, it'll open the Explorer windows for 2 of those settings. I think I've got it turned on, so yeah, wallpaper and purple port, because I then usually need to do something with those 2. So now we can open that. In fact, we can just make it full screen. I look at these images in Irfan View, by the way. It's a very fast image viewer and it's free. So I'd recommend that you download that. I don't know if it's available on Mac, but certainly on Windows. There's a 64-bit version and a full set of plugins. Download the plugin archive as well. So there we can see this is where we started with the processing, and that's where we've ended up. It is just cleaned, really, and just that's it. It's just cleaned. Well, in fact, that's not actually where we started, is it? Because that's post the initial Lightroom adjustments. So we've darkened the ceiling and corrected, balanced the tones a little bit, brought the shadows up, brought the highlights down, etc. But there you go. I do quite like a narrow 2:3 aspect ratio for figures standing up, because it kind of mimics the shape of the figure. If they're looking off to one side, sometimes you can make a horizontal frame out of this and it'll look fine. But I found that especially when it's a centralized composition here, we've got these pillars and things and the framing is all central. So it kind of makes sense to put it like that. And I quite like the Dutch angle, as they call it, where we've tilted the image. We had enough space, it's shot very wide to do that. You could do that in camera. I just normally forget. But anyway, enough waffle from me. Thank you very much for, if you made it this far, for watching this video end to end. I hope it was useful, and that it aids you in processing your own images. And I'm looking forward to seeing those online. So see you later.